There is a specific kind of pain that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with noise or drama. It does not break things or raise its voice. It simply appears one ordinary evening in an ordinary place, and it reaches into the chest of a man who thought he was long past being broken, and it squeezes slowly, deliberately, until he cannot breathe, cannot think, cannot remember a single reason why any of the things he spent the last 4 years destroying himself to build were ever supposed to matter. Tendai Makwasi was 41 years old, worth 3.7 billion United States dollars, and he had not cried since his father's funeral. He was not the kind of man people expected to find sitting alone at a restaurant table. Men like Tendai did not sit alone. They arrived with assistants, with bodyguards, with the particular gravitational pull of someone who had been in enough newspaper headlines that strangers recognized the face before they remembered the name. He was the founder and CEO of Musha Technologies, the Harare-born company that had quietly become the backbone of digital payments, healthcare data infrastructure, and agricultural supply chain technology across 14 African countries. Time magazine had put him on their list. The African Union had given him a seat at tables that used to exclude men who looked like him. His photograph hung in the business school of the University of Zimbabwe, in the same corridor where, 20 years ago, a professor had told him his ideas were too ambitious for the African market. He had framed the rejection letter from that professor and put it on the wall of his office. He was, by every visible measure, a man who had won. And yet on this particular Thursday evening in April, as the warm Harare air drifted through the open terrace of Nhanga restaurant in Avondale, Tendai sat by himself at a corner table with a glass of water he had not touched and a menu he had not opened, and he felt the specific hollowness of a man eating alone in a life that was built for two. He had not chosen this restaurant. His director of East African partnerships, a meticulous woman named Priscilla Dube, had booked it for a dinner with 3 potential investors from Nairobi. The investors had canceled 90 minutes ago, flight delay, apologetic voice note, reschedule next week. Priscilla had offered to cancel the reservation entirely. Tendai had told her not to bother. He was already in the car. He was already wearing the suit. He had already spent 40 minutes in traffic preparing himself to be charming and visionary and strategic. And the thought of returning to his penthouse in Boardrooms and sitting in that particular silence was more than he was willing to do tonight. So he stayed. He ordered nothing. He looked at the other tables, couples leaning toward each other, a family celebrating something with cake, 2 women laughing loudly at a shared phone screen, and he did what he had become very skilled at doing in recent years. He observed other people's happiness the way a man behind glass observes a fire, close enough to see it, far enough not to feel the warmth. He had been divorced for 14 months. He did not talk about it. Not to the press, not to his board, not to his mother, who still called every Sunday morning and pretended she was not watching him fall apart. The official narrative, carefully managed by his communications team, was that Tendai Makwasi and his wife had parted amicably, that the marriage had been a casualty of 2 demanding careers, and that both parties had moved forward with mutual respect. The official narrative was the kind of clean, bloodless story that people accepted, because the truth was too complicated, and too human, and far too exposing for a man of his profile. The truth was that he had chosen his company over his marriage so many times, in so many small and then enormous ways, that by the time his wife Adiz finally stood in their kitchen on a Sunday morning and told him she was done, there was almost nothing left of what they had been to each other. Not because she had stopped loving him, but because he had made her feel, quietly and consistently over 3 years, that she was the least urgent thing in his life. He had not argued with her. That was the thing that still kept him awake. He had not argued. He had not begged. He had not even fully understood in that moment what he was losing. He had stood in the kitchen with his phone in his hand. There had always been a phone in his hand, and he had listened to his wife tell him she was leaving, and somewhere in the middle of it his screen had lit up with a notification about a board meeting, and he had glanced at it. He had glanced at it. Adiz had seen him do it. She had stopped speaking mid-sentence. She had looked at him for a long moment with an expression he could not name then, but understood completely now. The expression of a woman who has just received the final confirmation of something she had been trying not to believe for a very long time. She had picked up the bag that was already packed, which meant she had been preparing for this conversation for longer than he knew, and she had walked out of the apartment without another word. He had let her go. He had told himself he would call her the next day when things settled. Then the week had swallowed him. Then the month. Then his lawyers were talking to her lawyers, and the thing was already in motion. And by the time Tendai Makwasi looked up from the relentless machinery of his ambition, his marriage was already a legal document in a filing cabinet. And the woman he had loved since they were both broke and brilliant and building things from nothing was living in a flat in Highlands with a phone number he was no longer supposed to call. He had not called. He thought about her, though, more than he admitted to anyone, more than was probably healthy for a man who was supposed to be focused on leading a company through its most critical expansion phase. He thought about the way she used to read in bed with one knee pulled up to her chest. He thought about the argument they had in Cape Town about whether jollof rice was better with tomato paste or fresh tomatoes, an argument that had lasted 3 days, and ended with both of them laughing so hard they were on the kitchen floor. He thought about the morning after his first major funding round came through, when they had sat on the balcony of their first real apartment in Harare with cheap wine in coffee mugs, and she had looked at him with those dark, serious eyes and said, "Tendai, do not let this change you into someone I don't recognize." He had promised her it wouldn't. He thought about that promise a great deal. If you have ever loved someone and watched your own choices be the reason they left, drop a word in the comments. Just one word. You don't have to explain anything. Tendai reached for his water glass and finally took a sip. The restaurant was full and warm and smelled of grilled meat and fresh bread, and something sweet he could not identify. A live musician in the corner was playing a mbira, the notes falling through the room like water over stones. And for just a moment, the music reached past Tendai's defenses and touched something soft and unguarded inside him. He closed his eyes. He breathed. And then he heard, from somewhere behind him and slightly to the left, a voice. He would later try to explain to his closest friend, a man named Obi Nziagwu, why that voice, out of all the voices layered through that full, noisy restaurant, was the one his brain isolated and held. Obi, who was a psychiatrist and therefore insufferable about these things, would say it was because the nervous system never truly forgets the people it has attached to. That the body keeps a record the mind pretends not to. That there are people whose voices are so deeply coded into us that we would recognize them in a thunderstorm, in a crowd of thousands, across 14 years and a divorce, and $3.7 billion worth of carefully constructed distance. Tendai opened his eyes. He turned his head slowly, the way you turn towards something you are not yet sure you want to see. And there she was. Adiz. Not at a table, not as a guest. She was carrying a tray. She was wearing the restaurant's uniform, a dark green wrap top and black trousers, and her locks were pulled back from her face, and she was walking between tables with the careful, deliberate movement of someone who had learned to carry weight differently than she used to. And it took Tendai exactly 3 seconds to understand why she was moving that way, why her hand rested on the edge of each table she passed as though she needed the steadiness, why the green wrap top was tied the way it was. Adiz was pregnant. Visibly, unmistakably, significantly pregnant. Tendai Makwasi, who had sat across from presidents and negotiated 9-figure deals, and once stared down a hostile acquisition attempt without blinking, felt the entire world tilt sideways. His water glass was still in his hand. He set it down very carefully, as though sudden movement might shatter something. His mind, normally a processor of extraordinary speed and clarity, had gone completely blank. There was only the image in front of him, his ex-wife, the woman he had let walk out of a kitchen 14 months ago, moving through a restaurant with a tray in her hands and another life growing inside her body. She had not seen him yet. He did not know whether to be relieved or devastated by that. What he did know, sitting in that corner with the Mbira playing softly and the city of Harare glittering outside the open terrace, was that something was happening inside him that he did not have a category for. Something older and fiercer than regret. Something that was rewriting, in real time, every story he had been telling himself about why what he had lost was survivable. He sat very still, and he watched her work. Part 2. The woman he thought he knew. Her name was Adiz Okonkwo Makwasi, though she had gone back to just Okonkwo after the divorce was finalized. A detail Tendai knew because his lawyer had mentioned it in passing, and because it had hit him, quietly, like a door being closed in a house he used to live in. She was 38 years old. She had a doctorate in public health from the University of Cape Town. She had spent 5 years working for the African Development Bank on maternal health financing frameworks across West Africa before she and Tendai had married, and she had moved to Harare and tried, with the particular grace of someone who is quietly extraordinary, to build a life inside the enormous gravitational force of his ambitions. Tendai watched her now from across the room and tried to reconcile what he was seeing with every assumption he had made about where her life had gone after him. He had assumed, without examining the assumption, because examining it would have required more honesty than he was ready for, that she was fine. That she was thriving, actually, in the way that strong women always seem to thrive after they left situations that were diminishing them. He had imagined her back in Lagos, maybe, at her parents' house in Victoria Island, surrounded by the elaborate love of her family, perhaps consulting for some international health organization, perhaps dating someone who actually showed up when she called. He had not imagined this. She moved between tables with competence and a kind of contained dignity that told him she was not new to this. This was not a woman who had taken a job last week in a moment of desperation. She knew where every table was. She knew the menu. She greeted a couple near the window by name. She laughed at something a young boy at the family table said, and the laugh was so completely and entirely at ease, full and unguarded and slightly too loud for the setting, that Tendai felt it like a physical thing in the center of his chest. She was okay. That was what confused him. She was okay in a way that had nothing to do with him, in a way that had not required him, and there was something in that, something he was not proud of that felt like being erased. He thought about calling her name. He did not. Instead, he picked up the menu and held it in front of his face like a man with a plan, which he absolutely did not have. The pregnancy was, by his estimation, and he had no real framework for this estimation. He was simply a man doing terrible mental mathematics with shaking hands, somewhere between 7 and 8 months along, which meant that Adiz had conceived roughly 6 or 7 months after their divorce was finalized, which meant she had moved on, which meant there was someone, which meant... He stopped. He ordered himself, with the same iron discipline he applied to quarterly earnings presentations, to stop. What Adiz did with her life after their marriage ended was none of his business. He had made it none of his business when he stood in that kitchen with his phone glowing and let her pick up a bag she had already packed and walk out of a life they had built together. He had forfeited the right to an opinion about her choices the moment he proved, definitively, that he valued the notification on his screen more than the woman standing in front of him. He knew this. He also could not stop watching her. She was beautiful in a way that had always disarmed him. Not in the polished, constructed way of the women who appeared at industry galas and angled themselves into photographs with him. Adi's beauty was the kind that came from being entirely herself. The strong jaw, the wide-set eyes that always seemed to be thinking something they hadn't decided to say yet, the particular way she carried herself like a woman who had decided long ago that she did not need anyone's permission for anything. He had fallen in love with her at a public health conference in Accra 11 years ago. She had been presenting a paper on community-based financing for rural maternal care, and she had used a date point that contradicted something he had said in his own keynote speech that morning, and she had done it without apology or softening, just the clean confidence of someone who knew her numbers were right. He had found her at the reception afterward and told her she had made him look bad in front of 400 people. She had said someone had to. He had been done for, immediately and completely from that moment. He looked at her now across the room and felt 11 years and $3.7 billion and 14 months of carefully maintained distance collapse into a single, clarifying point of pain. Something was wrong. Not with her pregnancy, not with her composure, which was, as always, formidable, something else. Something Tendai could not name yet but could feel the way you feel a change in weather before the clouds arrive. He had known this woman for 11 years. He had loved her for most of them, and beneath the competence and the grace and the full, unguarded laugh, there was something tight around her eyes, a kind of wariness, a hypervigilance he did not remember being there before. She was watching the door. Not constantly, not obviously, but in the way of someone who has trained themselves to monitor an exit without appearing to. Tendai set the menu down slowly. This detail lodged in him and would not move. Part 3. What the night revealed. She saw him at 8:47 p.m. He knew the exact time because he had been looking at his watch, a nervous habit he had developed during tense board meetings, and the moment Adi's eyes found his across the room, time did something strange. It slowed. It thickened. The mbira kept playing and the family table kept laughing and the city kept glittering outside, and in the middle of all of it, Adi's Okonkwo stood completely still with a tray in her hands and stared at her ex-husband. Her expression moved through several things in rapid, unguarded succession. Shock first, pure and total, then something that might have been a flash of relief, so brief he wondered if he had imagined it. Then the wall came up. He knew the wall. He had watched her build it, brick by brick, in the last year of their marriage, and seeing it snap into place now, across a restaurant directed at him, was its own particular punishment. She walked toward him. He had not expected that. He had expected her to redirect, to send another server, to find a manager and ask to be excused from his section. Instead, she walked directly to his table with the tray balanced on one hand, and her chin lifted at exactly the angle it always lifted when Adi's Okonkwo had decided to handle something head-on. Tendai? Her voice was neutral, professional, the voice she used for difficult situations that required her to be larger than her feelings. Adi's, his voice to his private shame, was not neutral at all. "Are you dining alone tonight?" "The investors canceled." Yes, alone." She nodded once, the way people nod when they are processing information they did not ask for. Her eyes did not drop to his hands or his jacket or any of the things that belonged to the version of him she used to know. They stayed on his face, level and careful. "Can I take your order?" "You don't have to. It's my table." A pause. "My section, so can I take your order?" It was not a question the second time. Tendai looked at her and understood that this was the only offer she was making. Professionalism, distance, the transaction of a server and a customer and nothing else. He could accept it or he could make this difficult, and making this difficult would mean being the kind of man he was trying very hard to no longer be. "The grilled tilapia," he said, "and whatever soup is best tonight." She wrote it down without looking at him. He watched her hand on the pen. She was not wearing any rings. He did not know what he had expected. "It'll be about 20 minutes, she said. She turned to go. "Adi's." She stopped but did not turn around immediately. He watched her shoulders rise once, fall once. Then she turned. "You look well," he said. It was an inadequate thing to say, and he knew it even as it came out of his mouth. It was the sentence of a man standing at the edge of everything he wanted to say with no courage to say any of it. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "I am well, Tendai," in a tone that made it clear this was the end of that particular exchange, and she walked away. He watched her go, and he noticed again what he had noticed before. The way her eyes went briefly to the door as she passed it. The slight tension that moved through her when a large man in a dark jacket walked in and then turned out to be a regular greeting the bartender. She was watching the door. He took out his phone. He put it back in his pocket. He took it out again. He thought about Priscilla, who was sharp and efficient and knew how to find information quickly. He thought about his security team. He thought about all the resources available to him, and then felt immediately disgusted with himself, because gathering intelligence on his ex-wife's life without her knowledge was exactly the kind of violation that had no justification. He put the phone away. He ate his dinner. She brought it herself, set it down with practiced efficiency, asked if he needed anything else, and did not wait for an answer before moving to the next table. The tilapia was extraordinary. The soup was a rich, fragrant groundnut with chunks of tender beef that tasted like it had been made by someone's grandmother with a very strong opinion about the right amount of pepper. He ate slowly and he thought. At 9:45, when the dinner crowd was thinning and he had been sitting at the table for 2 hours on a single meal, he watched Adiz pause between tables and press one hand flat against the small of her back for just a moment. A private gesture, automatic, the gesture of a body under strain, and something in him made a decision he had not consciously arrived at. He was not leaving yet. He called the waiter over, a young man with a name tag that said blessing, and he asked for the bill and also for the manager. The manager was a compact, efficient woman named Mrs. Farai Sithole, who arrived with the particular expression of someone who has learned to approach wealthy customers with both warmth and vigilance. "Good evening, sir. I hope everything was to your satisfaction." "Everything was exceptional," Tendai said. "I'd like to leave a review," he paused, "and I'd like to make a reservation, a standing one. Thursday evening, 7:30, this table." Mrs. Sithole smiled. "Of course, can I take a name?" "Makwasi." Something flickered in her eyes. She knew the name. Everyone in Harari's business circles knew the name, but she was professional and did not make a performance of it. "Wonderful, Mr. Makwasi. We'll see you next Thursday." He left. He sat in the back of Godfrey's car and watched the restaurant lights shrink in the window and felt, for the first time in 14 months, something he had almost forgotten the texture of. Purpose. Not the manufactured purpose of the next product launch or the next funding round. The specific, terrifying, irreplaceable purpose of a man who has just remembered what actually matters to him. If your own ambition has ever cost you the most important person in your life, you don't have to explain it here. But if you want to, the comments are open. Sometimes it helps to say it somewhere. Part 4. The things running beneath the surface. He came back the following Thursday. And the Thursday after that. He was not subtle about it. He did not pretend to be passing through or to have other business in the area. He came at 7:30. He sat at his table. He ate a full meal. And he was unfailingly, precisely courteous to every member of the staff, including Adiz, who served his section every week with the same contained professionalism she had employed on the first night, and who had clearly decided that acknowledging the strangeness of this arrangement was beneath her. By the third Thursday, they were talking. Carefully, at first. The kind of talking that happens in the narrow corridor between two people who know each other too well to pretend and have too much unresolved between them to be fully honest. He asked about the soup. She told him the recipe was Mrs. Sithole's mother's. He asked if the Mbira player was there every week. She said Tuesdays and Thursdays. He asked if the upstairs terrace was ever available for private dinners. She looked at him with those level, thinking eyes and said, "Tendai, what are you doing?" "Having dinner. You have a personal chef, 3 company expense accounts, and a membership to every significant private dining establishment in this city. The tilapia here is better. Don't be clever with me." "I'm not being clever." She was standing at his table with one hand resting on the back of the chair across from him, and the evening light was coming in warm and gold from the terrace, and she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the shift she was working. She looked tired in the deep way of someone carrying something heavy for a long time without being able to put it down. "Are you going to tell me why you're really here?" she said. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. She looked at him for a moment. Then she pulled the chair out and sat down, and he understood that this was not something she did for customers, and that something had just shifted between them in a way that was not entirely safe for either of them. "I have 12 minutes before my next table's order is ready," she said. He nodded. "Then talk fast." There was so much he could have said. He could have started with "I'm sorry," which was true and enormous and long overdue. He could have started with "I didn't understand what I was losing," which was also true and possibly more cowardly, because it suggested a kind of ignorance he was not sure he had actually been innocent of. He could have started with "Why are you working here?" which was the question he actually most wanted answered, but which felt like the most dangerous one to ask, because the answer might require her to tell him something about her life that would confirm just how thoroughly he had failed her. He started with none of these things. He said, "I think about the morning in Cape Town, when we had the jollof argument." She blinked. She had not expected that. "You said fresh tomatoes were a betrayal of the tradition," he continued. "I said the tradition was itself an argument for innovation. You threw a dishcloth at me." The corner of her mouth moved, just barely. "You acted like I'd suggested something criminal," she said. "You had a very strong position." "I was right. You were passionate, the distinction matters." And there it was, the thing that had always lived between them, the specific frequency of their humor, the way they had always been able to locate each other inside an argument and make it something else entirely. It lasted only a moment. Then she straightened her shoulders and looked at him with the careful eyes again. "Tendai, I know." "What do you know?" He looked at her. "I know that me sitting here every Thursday is not a small thing. I know it's not fair to you. I know that what I did, what I failed to do, hurt you in ways I am still discovering the actual dimensions of." He paused. "I know that you are tired and you are watching the door and there is something happening in your life that I don't have the right to ask you about." She went very still. "What do you mean watching the door?" "You check it every time someone enters. You've been doing it since the first night." He kept his voice neutral, careful. "Something has you on alert, Adiz. I don't know what it is, but I see it." She looked down at the table. Her jaw tightened. "My 12 minutes are up," she said quietly and stood. He did not try to stop her. But she paused before she turned away and she said, very quietly without looking at him, "Thursday next week. There's a booth in the back that's more private. Ask Blessing to seat you there." She walked away before he could respond. He sat with that sentence for the rest of the night, and for most of the following week, turning it over the way you turn over something valuable to check whether it's real. What he did not know yet, what he was about to discover in layers that would undo and rebuild him, was that the fatigue in Adiz's eyes and the way she watched the door, and the reason she was working a restaurant shift while 8 months pregnant were all threads of the same story. A story that had a villain in it. A story that had been running underneath the surface of everything, in the dark, for months. A story that he was now, whether he was ready or not, about to be pulled into. Think about a time someone showed up for you after you had stopped expecting them to. What did that feel like? Tell us in the comments. Part 5. the thing she had been carrying alone. He sat in the back booth the following Thursday. She came to him during a lull, when the restaurant was between its dinner rush and its late crowd, and she sat across from him, and she looked like someone who had made a decision about something difficult and was now committed to seeing it through regardless of what it cost. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Not because I need your help. I need you to understand that part first." "I understand." "I'm serious, Tendai. I am not sitting here because I need rescuing. I am sitting here because I have been carrying this alone for a long time and it has become—" She stopped, took a breath, put one hand flat on the table. "It has become too heavy to carry quietly." "I'm listening." She looked at him. "The baby's father is Emeka Adebisi." The name landed on the table between them like a stone. Tendai knew the name. Of course he knew the name. Emeka Adebisi was a Lagos-based real estate developer with a taste for expensive things and a reputation that depended enormously on which city you were in and who you asked. In Lagos, he was a success story, self-made, philanthropic on paper, photographed at all the right events. In Harari's business circles, the whispers were quieter and less flattering. Tendai had met him twice at industry events. He had not liked him either time and had attributed it to personal chemistry. "How long?" Tendai asked. "We were together for 8 months. I ended it 4 months ago." Her voice was steady. "He did not accept that I ended it." Silence. "Define did not accept," Tendai said, and his voice had changed. Something in it had gone very quiet and very cold in the way that things go quiet before they become dangerous. Adiz looked at him with those careful eyes, reading him, calibrating how much to say. "He has shown up at my flat 4 times. The first 2 times I thought it was a conversation I could manage. The third time she paused. He did not touch me, but he made it very clear that he considered the relationship ongoing regardless of what I had decided, that the pregnancy meant he had a claim, his word, a claim." Tendai's hand on the table was perfectly still, the stillness of something that has decided not to move yet. "The 4th time. Last month. He came with a lawyer and a document suggesting that I had agreed in what he characterized as an informal verbal arrangement to allow him full parental authority in exchange for financial support. There was no such agreement. I have never signed anything. I have a public health doctorate, Tendai. I am not a person who makes verbal arrangements about parental rights." He fabricated it. And his lawyer, a man named Colonel Bello who has a reputation in Lagos for this particular kind of work, presented it as though it were simply a matter of my signing to confirm what we had already decided. She paused. "When I told him I would not sign and that he should leave, he said something." She stopped. "Adiz." He said, "You don't have the resources to fight me on this." He said it very calmly. He said, "You are working a restaurant job in Harare while I have 12 lawyers and the patience of a man who is used to eventually getting what he wants." The silence that followed that sentence was its own kind of verdict. Tendai looked at his ex-wife sitting across from him. This brilliant, formidable woman with a doctorate and a decade of international development work, and a baby growing inside her, and a man using her exhaustion and her isolation as weapons against her. And he felt something happen inside him that was clean and absolute and left no room for ambiguity. "Why are you working here?" he asked, and the question came out gently without accusation. She looked at him. For the first time since he had sat down at her table 3 weeks ago, the wall dropped slightly, not entirely, but enough for him to see what was behind it. "I had a position," she said. "A consultancy contract with a regional health ministry. It was a good contract, significant work. It fell through 6 weeks ago. The ministry changed leadership. The new team had their own people. It happens. Normally it happens and you find the next thing. But I was already 7 months pregnant, and finding the next thing when you are visibly 7 months pregnant and your former partner is making calls to professional contacts and suggesting to people, carefully, nothing provable, that you are emotionally unstable. She stopped. Let that settle. I am not emotionally unstable. I know. I am a woman trying to protect herself and her child with the options available to her. Her chin came up. This job pays my rent. Mrs. Sithole has been kind. The hours work. I am not ashamed of it. I never suggested you should be. Many people have. He leaned forward. He looked at her directly. I need you to listen to me very carefully, Adiz. Don't make me any promises, she said immediately. I'm not making promises. I'm making a statement of fact. He paused. You are not fighting this alone anymore. Not because I am trying to earn something or because I think this gives me the right to walk back into your life as though I didn't break it, but because what this man is doing is wrong and he is counting on your isolation, and I am in a position to remove that advantage from him. Completely. She looked at him for a long time. What does that mean practically? She asked. And he told her. Part 6. The war Emeka did not see coming. What Tendai Makwasi did next was not what anyone who knew his reputation would have expected. He did not call a lawyer first. He did not call his communications team or his chief of staff or any of the formidable machinery of Musha Technologies. He did not issue a statement or threaten legal action or make a single phone call that could be characterized as aggressive. He called his mother. Mama Vangai Makwasi was 71 years old, had raised 4 children in Chitungwiza on a secondary school teacher's salary after her husband died, and had opinions about everything with the confidence of someone who had been proven right often enough to stop apologizing for it. She was also, and this was not widely known outside the family, one of the sharpest strategic minds Tendai had ever encountered. He had learned more about negotiation, leverage, and the art of the long game from watching his mother navigate difficult situations than from any business school curriculum. Adiz, his mother said when he told her. Yes, Mama. The Adiz who you allowed to leave that apartment. Yes. A pause, and now a man is threatening her. Yes. Another pause, and you are calling me instead of doing something foolish. I am calling you so that I do not do something foolish. He heard her exhale, and in that exhale was 14 months of Sunday morning phone calls and careful, loving patience. Tell me everything, she said. He told her everything. Mama Vangai listened without interrupting, which was how he knew she was taking it seriously. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Adiz is alone in Harare, she said. Yes. That ends tonight. I am calling her. Don't argue with me. I wasn't. You were about to. A pause. And Tendai, this man Emeka, you said he made calls to her professional contacts. Yes. Then his calls were about her professional reputation, which means the solution is also professional, not personal. He could hear her thinking. You have a board member who sits on the African Development Bank Advisory Committee. Nkosi Dlamini. Adiz has a doctorate in public health and 10 years of field work. How many organizations that Musha Technologies partners with work on maternal and child health initiatives? Tendai stopped. Mohammed, I am asking a question. 11, he said slowly. 11 partner organizations across our health data vertical. And does any of them need a senior consultant with her particular expertise on a contract that would preempt the narrative that she is unemployable? He closed his eyes. You, he said, are remarkable. I know, call Nkosi. The next 72 hours were, by any objective measure, the most deliberate and controlled deployment of Tendai Makwasi's considerable resources since the company's founding. He did not move loudly. He did not move visibly. He moved the way his mother had always moved, precisely, through channels, with full understanding of what each action would cost and what it would produce. He called Nkosi Dlamini, who sat on the ADB advisory committee and who owed Tendai nothing but respected him enormously, and within 48 hours Adiz had a call from the ADB's Regional Health Financing Division, expressing interest in her consultancy services on a 12-month contract, at full rate, with a Harare-based office arrangement. He called his own general counsel, a meticulous man named Advocate Chidi Osai, and within 24 hours, Advocate Osai had reviewed every document Emeka Adebisi had presented to Adiz, identified 3 separate provisions that constituted what Zimbabwean and Nigerian family law would treat as coercive misrepresentation, and drafted a cease and desist letter that was simultaneously sent to Emeka's personal address in Lagos, his company's registered legal address, and his lawyer Colonel Bello's firm. He did not tell Adiz he had done any of this until it was already done. He told her on a Thursday evening in the back booth, over food neither of them was eating. She went very still when he finished. "You did all of this," she said. "Yes." "Without asking me." He paused. "Yes, and I want to explain why because I know that's a problem. It is a very large problem, Tendai. I know. I did it without asking because I knew that if I asked, you would say no. Not because it wasn't the right help, but because accepting it from me specifically would feel like," he stopped, "like something you owe me, or like I'm trying to purchase something, and neither of those things is what this is." She looked at him. "Then what is it?" "It's what I should have been doing for 3 years, he said quietly. "Paying attention, being useful, showing up." He paused. "I know it's late. I know that it doesn't undo what I failed to do when it was the right time to do it. I'm not asking you to see it as anything other than what it is, a man trying to be, in a crisis, the person he should have been all along." The restaurant hummed around them. Outside, Harare moved through its evening. Adiz looked at him for a long time. "The cease and desist," she said finally. "What happens if he ignores it?" "Advocate Osai has already contacted a Lagos-based firm with a strong family law division. If he escalates, we escalate. He may have 12 lawyers. We have better ones." "Tendai, I am not doing this to fight him. I am doing this so you don't have to fight him alone." She looked away, out toward the terrace. The mbira was playing again. "He's going to push back," she said. "Let him. He has influence. He will make noise. He is a man who uses noise to frighten people who have less than him," Tendai said. "He has never encountered someone who has more and is not frightened." A pause. "That sounds like arrogance," she said. "It is arrogance," he said, "but in this particular case it also happens to be accurate." She looked back at him, and this time the wall was not entirely up. He could see through it to something he recognized, not forgiveness, not yet, not anything he had the right to claim, but something. An opening, a breath of space where there had been none. "Thank you," she said, simple, direct, the way Adiz had always said the things that mattered. He nodded. They sat in the back booth for another hour and talked about things that were not the crisis. And it was, in its quiet and complicated way, one of the most important hours of Tendai Makwasi's 41 years. Here is something worth sitting with. Is there a person in your life right now who is carrying something too heavy because they are afraid to ask you for help? What's stopping you from showing up? Leave your thoughts below. Part 7. What Emeka got wrong. Emeka Adebisi made a mistake. It was the kind of mistake that men with a great deal of money and a lifetime of unchallenged entitlement are particularly prone to making. He received the cease and desist letter, read it, and instead of consulting quietly with competent counsel and reassessing his position, he made 3 phone calls. The first was to a journalist at a Lagos gossip publication with a history of running unverified stories about public figures. The second was to a business contact in Harare, who had a loose connection to one of Musha Technology's smaller investors. The third was to his lawyer Colonel Bello, instructing him to file a countermotion in a Lagos family court, asserting parental rights on an expedited timeline, apparently on the theory that speed and noise would produce the outcome that reasonableness had not. He did not know that Advocate Osai had anticipated all three moves. He did not know that the journalist he called had, 3 years ago, written a story that Musha Technology's communications team had been instrumental in killing before publication, and that the journalist therefore had significant reason to value the relationship with Musha over a tip from a property developer with a suspect reputation. He did not know that the investor contact in Harare had actually told Priscilla Dube about the call within 2 hours, because in Harare's business community, the calculus of loyalty was clear. And he did not know, this was the one that would prove most consequential, that Adiz had, at her sister's gentle insistence over a video call, begun documenting everything. Dates, times, exact words. 4 months of careful, meticulous documentation by a woman who held a doctorate and understood the evidentiary value of a precise record. When Emeka's Lagos filing landed, Advocate Osai had already prepared the response. It was submitted within 48 hours, attached to Adiz's documentation and a formal affidavit from 2 witnesses who had observed Emeka's behavior at her flat. And it was, by every account that reached Tendai, a comprehensive and devastating rebuttal. Emeka's lawyer stopped returning calls. Emeka himself went quiet. The silence lasted for 9 days. Then a letter arrived from a new legal representative, a notably more senior and cautious firm, expressing a desire to negotiate a reasonable co-parenting arrangement that respected the mother's autonomy and primary custody. Adiz called Tendai when the letter arrived, not to ask for his help reading it. She had already read it. She called because she needed to tell someone, and he was, at some point in the past weeks, without either of them formally deciding it, the person she called when things happened. He blinked, she said. He was always going to blink. He was counting on you being too tired to fight. Once it was clear you weren't fighting alone, the math changed. I'm still tired, she said. I want to be honest about that. I'm exhausted, actually. I know. I'm 38 years old, and I'm going to have a baby in 6 weeks, and the father of my child is a man who I misjudged badly. And I spent 14 months being angry at you for being the reason I was available to misjudge him. He was quiet. That's a lot, he said carefully. It's the truth. You asked for honesty once, a long time ago. You said you wanted a marriage where we told each other the truth even when it was inconvenient. I did say that. And then you spent 3 years being too busy to hear it. Yes. So I stopped telling you. Yes. And then I left. Yes. A long pause. Tendai, she said. I'm here. Why are you really doing this? All of it. The lawyers, the ADB connection, the Thursday dinners. What do you actually want? He thought about the penthouse at 2 in the morning. The glass and the silence and the weight of everything built and nothing shared. He thought about the kitchen and the phone notification and the bag she had already packed. He thought about 11 years and a Jollof argument and a conference in Accra where a woman had told him someone had to make him look bad. I want to be the person you thought I was when you agreed to marry me, he said. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if too much has happened, but that's the truth. The line was quiet for a moment. The baby, she said, she's a girl, I found out last month. He felt something move through him that had no name. She's healthy, Adiz said. Strong heartbeat. The midwife says she's going to be someone with opinions. That is an absolute certainty, he said, given her mother. A breath, almost a laugh, not quite. I need to sleep, she said. But Tendai, I'm glad you were in that restaurant. So am I. Don't make it strange. I'm trying very hard not to. She said good night and ended the call. He sat with the phone in his hand in his quiet penthouse and felt, for the first time in longer than he could precisely identify, that the silence around him was not oppressive, that it was simply the space before the next thing, that there was a next thing. Part 8. The night the city held its breath. Adiz went into labor on a Sunday morning. Not the calm, scheduled, everything is prepared labor of plans, the abrupt 2 weeks early. Woke up at 4 a.m. with a certainty labor of a baby who had decided the timeline was hers to determine. She called her sister Chidinma first. Chidinma was in Lagos and answered immediately and was loudly, helpfully, productively useless from 4,000 kilometers away. She called her midwife. She called Mrs. Sithole, who had become, quietly, one of the steadying presences in her life. And then, without entirely deciding to, she called Tendai. He answered on the second ring. "It's time," she said. He was in his car within 8 minutes. Godfrey broke several traffic conventions getting to her flat in Highlands, and Tendai arrived to find Adiz standing in her doorway with a hospital bag and the particular expression of a woman who is managing pain with the same composure she managed everything, visibly, consciously, and without asking anyone else to carry it. "You didn't have to," she started. "I know," he said. "Can I take the bag?" She handed him the bag. They drove to the hospital in the gray-pink light of the Harare morning, the city still mostly asleep, the streets quiet in a way they rarely were. Adiz looked out the window and he looked at the road, and Godfrey drove carefully and nobody said anything for a while, and it was, strangely, not uncomfortable. "I'm nervous," she said quietly. "You're going to be extraordinary," he said. "You can't know that. I've known you for 11 years. I can absolutely know that." She turned to look at him. He kept his eyes on the road ahead. She turned back to the window. "Stay," she said. "At the hospital. You don't have to be in, you don't need to be there for that. But stay in the building. I don't want to, I'd rather not be the only person waiting for news about myself." "I'll stay," he said simply. He stayed. He sat in a hospital corridor for 6 hours with bad coffee and a phone he barely looked at. And at 11:47 on a Sunday morning, a nurse came out and told him that Adiz Okonkwo and her daughter were both well, and that Ms. Okonkwo had asked if he would like to come in. He stood up. He walked down the corridor. He pushed open the door. Adiz was in the bed, exhausted and radiant in the specific way of women who have just done something enormous with their bodies, and she was holding a very small, very new person who was wrapped in a hospital blanket and appeared to have an opinion about being wrapped in it. Tendai stood in the doorway and could not move. "Come in," Adiz said. Her voice was different, soft in a way that had nothing to do with weakness. He walked to the bedside. He looked at the baby. She had Adiz's jaw already, somehow, even in the compressed and miraculous newness of her face. She had dark, unfocused eyes that appeared to be trying to process an enormous amount of information about a world she had very recently arrived in. "Her name," Adiz said, "is Sachima." She paused. "It means God has answered." Tendai sat down in the chair beside the bed. He did not trust his voice. He understood this about himself and did not attempt to speak until he was confident the words would come out with dignity. After a moment he said, "She is remarkable. She is 4 hours old. She is already remarkable." Adiz looked at him, the careful eyes but different now, softer at the edges, something resolved in them that had not been resolved before. "Tendai," she said, "what are we doing?" "I don't know exactly," he said honestly, "but I know that whatever it is, I want to do it better than I've done anything before." "That's not a plan." "No, it's a commitment." He paused. "The plan we can build." She was quiet for a moment, looking down at her daughter. "I am not the same person I was 4 years ago," she said. "Neither am I. You would need to prove that, over time, Not in a crisis. Anyone can show up in a crisis. Over ordinary time, ordinary Thursdays, ordinary mornings when there's nothing urgent and the phone is lit up and the question is just what you choose to do with your attention. I know, he said. I know exactly what I failed at and I know exactly where the work is. This is not a reconciliation conversation, she said carefully. I know. This is we are at a beginning of something that might become something if it's done right. Yes. She looked at him, long and level, and with all 11 years of knowing him and being failed by him and being surprised by him running behind her eyes. One Thursday at a time, she said. One Thursday at a time, he agreed. Sachima made a small, imperious sound that seemed to express dissatisfaction with the pace of the conversation, and both of them looked at her, and for just a moment, in a hospital room in Harare on a Sunday morning, in the particular golden light of a city that was waking up and beginning its week, they laughed. Together. At the same thing. In the same breath. It was the most significant thing that had happened to Tendai Makwasi in years. What's the bravest thing someone has ever done to show up for you? Tell us in the comments, the real ones, the simple ones. We want to hear them. Part 9. What was built after? 6 months later, on a Thursday evening, a man walked into Nhanga restaurant in Avondale and was greeted by Mrs. Sithole with the warmth she reserved for regular guests. He was shown to a table, not the corner table he had started at, not the back booth where confessions had been made, but a table on the open terrace, where the evening air came in warm and scented with jacaranda, and the city spread out below in its amber and white light. He sat down. He was not alone. Across from him sat a woman reading something on her phone with one knee pulled up to her chest, the old reading habit, and next to her on the bench seat was an ergonomic infant carrier from which a small, alert, opinionated 3-month-old named Sachima surveyed the restaurant with the focused, assessing gaze of someone taking detailed notes. Adiz put her phone down. She's been staring at that waiter for 4 minutes, she said, indicating Blessing, who had become mildly alarmed at the infant's intensity. She's evaluating him, Tendai said. She gets that from you. She gets the intense staring from you. You stare at people during meetings, Chitty told me. Chitty talks too much. Chitty adores you. He just also talks too much. They ordered. The Mbira player was in his corner, the music threading through the evening, and Sachima appeared to have opinions about the music as well, her head turning toward the sound with concentrated interest. Things were not simple. Tendai understood, with the clarity of a man who had done real work on himself over the past months, actual therapy, actual conversations with his mother and with Obi the psychiatrist and with himself in the 4 in the morning dark, that the rebuilding of something broken could not be rushed and should not be rushed. He and Adiz were not married. They were not a couple, not yet, not in the formal declared sense of the word. They were two people who had loved each other, been broken by their own failures and circumstances, and were choosing slowly, deliberately, with their eyes open, to see whether what they had built before could become something better. It was not a reconciliation. It was, as Adiz had said, a beginning. He had changed his schedule. This was not a small thing. This was the most significant operational change he had made at Musha Technology since its founding. He had hired a chief operating officer, a brilliant Ghanaian woman named Efua Asant who ran the daily machinery with a competence that honestly made him feel slightly redundant, and he had reclaimed his evenings. Not all of them, but enough. He was home by 7 on most nights. He cooked, badly but enthusiastically on Sundays. He read on the balcony. He called his mother every Sunday without her having to call him. He went to therapy. He did not tell the press any of this. He did not announce it. He simply did it, in the private and ongoing way of someone who has decided that the internal work is more important than the external optics. The Emeka situation had resolved, quietly, into a legal co-parenting framework that was being handled by lawyers, and that, for the moment, required nothing from Adiz except that she be present for her daughter and for her own life. Emeka's counterclaims had evaporated when his lawyers encountered the full weight of documentation and representation. He had not contacted Adiz directly in 4 months. Whether this would last was a question time would answer, but for now there was space. There was air. Adiz had taken the ADB consultancy contract. She was working again in the field she loved, the one she was extraordinary at, contributing to maternal health financing frameworks across the Great Lakes region, and being paid at the rate her experience justified. She had moved from the flat in Highlands to a larger place in Borrowdale, not the apartment she and Tendai had shared, a different one, hers, with a room she had painted yellow for Tsuchima, and a kitchen with enough counter space for someone with strong opinions about fresh tomatoes. Mrs. Sithole had come to the naming ceremony for Tsuchima and had cried, which surprised everyone who thought they knew her. On the terrace of Nhanga, the food arrived. The groundnut soup with the tender beef, the grilled fish, the bread. They ate and talked about Priscilla's expansion report, about a paper Adiz was co-authoring, about Tsuchima's apparent conviction that sleep was optional, and the conversation was easy in the way that conversations are easy when the people having them have stopped pretending to be less than they are to each other. At some point, Tsuchima, apparently satisfied with her assessment of the restaurant, closed her eyes and fell asleep with the absoluteness of someone who had decided the evening's data collection was complete. Adiz looked at her daughter sleeping. Tendai looked at Adiz. She must have felt it because she looked up at him with the level, thinking eyes, the eyes that were always processing something they hadn't decided to say yet, and she said, "You're starring." "I'm looking," he said. "There's a difference." She tilted her head slightly. Outside, a warm Harari gust moved through the terrace and rustled the jacaranda along the fence, and the Mbira caught it and rode it, and the music was briefly, perfectly itself. "You know what I thought the first time I saw you sitting at that corner table," she said. "What?" "I thought, that man looks like someone who forgot where he put the most important thing he owned, and has been quietly looking for it ever since." He held her gaze. "You weren't wrong," he said. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Thursdays." "Thursdays," he agreed. And Tsuchima slept between them in the warm Harari evening, and the city spread out below the terrace in all its amber and white light, and somewhere in the middle of the ordinary Thursday, the way things sometimes happen, not dramatically, not with announcements, but quietly and with full weight, something that had been lost found its way back. Not the same as it was. Better. The way things are always better when they are rebuilt with the knowledge of what broke them. Here's our final question for you, and we really mean this one. What is the one thing you would do differently if you could sit back down at the table with the person you let walk away? Tell us below, because you're not alone in that question. None of us are. And if this story reached something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear that showing up, even late, even imperfectly, can still mean everything. And